continue.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Krash and Thunders Rock and Roll Show. I'm Thunders, this is Krash, and today we've got the Microdot Gnome himself with us, Gary Lee Connor.
Howdy.
Special famously of the Screaming Trees. Got a solo work of his own right that goes as far back as 1990 with The Purple Outside. We're here to discuss past and present, all things Gary Lee. How are you, man?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good.
Glad to have you on the show, man.
Oh, thanks.
Well, Krash, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. I would love to talk about your solo work, your newest solo work first, if you don't mind. Revelations and Fuzz and the opposite of Christmas.
Yeah.
I've been really digging those two albums the last couple months or a couple weeks actually, and I really dig the Revelations and Fuzz. It's got a great sound to it, I think. The guitar tone, just the atmosphere of the album is just really good. And I just wanted to know a little bit of information on your, two new albums. Just was it always a plan to release them so quick and quick together?
No. Yeah, I've been working on, let's see, my last record I did before came out in 2018 was Unicorn Curry. Mm-hmm. And that was like, and after that I kind of like, I always just gonna take my time and like, when the songs come along, then I finally do the album. But I've been working towards, I came up with that title a couple of years ago, Revelations and Fuzz, and had been writing new songs for it. But then like, the beginning of 2020, I started writing a few more songs and realized, okay, I'm probably about ready to start working on the record. But then in the meantime, I wrote some more songs. So about half the songs were like written like pretty much maybe like, 4 or 5 months right before I finished it. And I did it mostly like in August and September. I recorded some, so most of the recording was in August and September 2020 for Revelation Buzz. And then when I finish it, I usually just, when I finish stuff, I just release it digitally and then see what happens with the vinyl. Right now I've got a hook up with Vince Reptum Records, a small record company in Italy that does, the 300 copies usually of like 3 of my albums, I guess. 3 of them so far, including that one. And then as soon as I got done with it, I suddenly was writing some more songs. I was like, man, and I always had this idea, like I should like write an album and like record it like in one day. That was like the idea. But yeah, I just wrote almost everything. There was 1 or 2 older songs on that opposite of Christmas album. And I was like, and it was right around Christmas. And I thought of that title because it was like, with the pandemic and everything, thinking, well, this is sort of like, this year is kind of like the opposite of Christmas at Christmas. Yeah. Then, so, and I gave myself a deadline. I was like, I'm going to release it on Christmas, or Christmas Eve it was. And so I had to finish it by then. And I was, like working on it every day. And usually I don't do that too much, except for right at the end, when I'm mixing and stuff. But I instead of just like waiting and kind of gradually working on the thing, I just said, do it. And, I finished it. So I don't know when that's going to come out in vinyl yet, but hopefully it will eventually.
From what I've seen, you sold out pretty fast with the Revelations of Fuzz and the Opposite of Christmas too, as well, right?
Yeah, it was just 2 months, I think. Let's see, or at least in October, 3 months, I guess. 2 months, 3 months. No, it was 2 months because I released the Revelations and Fuzz in October 15th or something like that, and Opposite of Christmas on December 24th or something like that. So yeah, they were both, like I said, with Revelations Fuzz too, I wasn't sure, I've been wanting to get it done, and I was just like, procrastinating, not doing it. Finally, last August, I was like, I'm going to do it. And I just, forced myself to, I usually get to that point when I have a bunch of songs, like, I'm ready to do the record, and I've been like, kind of like gradually working on it for a couple of years or something like that. And then I just, don't really plan anything out too much. I just let everything happen because, you know, I don't have nobody, I do everything I want to, and nobody's telling me, you know, I do everything myself. So I don't have to,
Yeah, it's usually how the best music is made to begin with. So.
yeah, that's the way, you know, I really, nowadays, I'm not that much different than when I lived in Ellensburg, like when we first started the Screaming Trees or before the Screaming Trees, you know, I'm a complete hermit, don't know any, you know, don't really hang out with anybody. I actually don't hang out with anybody except my wife and my daughter.
I'm the same way, man.
Yeah. I don't like to hang out with people. I don't know. I get people like I feel bad sometimes because like people like, you know, I was visiting my daughter over in Denton, and a couple of, you know, I post stuff on Facebook about it. Kind of a couple people are like, hey, I live in Denton, you want to get together or something? I'm just like, yeah, but I just, you know, I've always been that way though. I was like, I just don't like hanging out with people I don't know.
Yeah. I know how you feel, man.
Yeah. So some people are like that. Some people are totally social. But
yeah.
You know.
But
yeah,
yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I never would have had any friends at all if it went for Van. Like all my friends I got when the band started, like I was, you know, had no friends, and then Van, he's about 4.5 years younger than me, and I, you know, I wouldn't even have been a band for Van because I didn't, you know, it was such a total recluse. But yeah, all the people that he knew ended up being sort of friends of mine, at least, or acquaintances. I mean, I never had any real good friends except my wife and Van. You know.
Yeah, I mean, they're not bad friends to have then. You know.
No.
So, but yeah, I wanted to kind of like when I'm listening to Revelations and Fuzz say, I'm hearing like influences of like Zombies and Iron Butterfly and maybe a little bit of Steppenwolf, early Steppenwolf. Now I wanted to see like what are your influences for like that type of album compared to say a Screaming Trees album, or is it pretty much the same, just kind of directed different ways?
Yeah, well, it depends on what era of the Screaming Trees you're talking about. I mean, the early days probably. I mean, when I started doing my more solo stuff like 10, 12 years ago, I just decided, you know, I'm gonna like do the most psychedelic stuff I can because I want to, and you know, stop at me. But see, the problem with the early Screaming Trees was with me writing the songs is I was, you know, being influenced by all the mostly 60s stuff at the time. Also some other stuff too, but you know, like punk rock and new wave stuff. But the 60s was overriding for me. And nobody else wanted to do that, you know, and nobody else wanted to be a psychedelic band, but I was writing the song, so it was kind of, you know, and so you know, but later on when we got signed to Epic, we kind of moved in a slightly different direction where we were doing, well, first thing that happened was that we actually wrote a lot of songs together when we did Sweet Oblivion. We got together as a band that rehearsed them and wrote songs together, like in the same room, you know, because most of the songwriting collaboration between me and Lanigan, except in the early days, was, you know, I write something, give it to him, and he'd just like do whatever he wanted to with it, you know. Changed a lot. Sometimes he wouldn't change anything. So, but later, I think, you know, definitely more influenced by probably like classic rock stuff, just because I was trying to write stuff like that. But I've always, you know, my definitely 60s influences like been the overriding thing of my songwriting, although a lot of other stuff slips into it. And on the other hand, I don't want to sound just like, you know, something from the 60s. I want to sound like something that's coming out now that's influenced stuff, because you know there's some bands that, you know, sound just like, man, they're like recently the band came out, the Electric Looking Glass. I posted that a while back. And they I mean, they look like they look and sound like they got a time machine in 1967 and came like to and yeah, so but they were on Hypnotic Bridge Records, and they got a lot of cool psychedelic stuff on that label. But these guys are like, I mean, they dress, look, sound exactly like you know, 67, maybe 68.
Well, the problem with a lot of that stuff is that I find, and I love, you know, psychedelic stuff and stoner rock and all that kind of stuff that's kind of modern derivatives.
Yeah.
But I find a lot of the modern neo psychedelia, like the bands, their artwork and stuff sound better than they do because they're just trying too hard to recreate something.
Yeah. Also, it's sort of like the term psychedelic sort of is kind of loose nowadays. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I find a playlist of neo psychedelic stuff, and maybe like about a third of it sort of like, well, it doesn't really sound very psychedelic to me, or it's really heavy. The heavy psychedelic, always been that, heaviness, especially in some of the stuff in the early 70s was kind of psychedelic. But it seems like it's. I always have this thing like where, like, especially with the stoner rock stuff, it's like if it sounds too much like Black Sabbath, I don't quite really like it, because it's like, especially the vocal. Sometimes the vocals sound nothing like Ozzy, but the music sounds like Black Sabbath. That can be pretty cool,
Yeah.
But
well, it's mainly Sabbath worship. That's more in the doom genre. The stoner rock guys have more of a flavor.
Yeah, it's like a lot of stuff's called stoner rock, though. That's more, or something like that. It just, the labels are so tough, because go on to find stuff to listen to, because I don't know, it's really hit and miss. Like if you just like look at, like, you can't just look, if you're into rock music and you want to like find new stuff, if you go like to the top 40 or something, you're like, this is like, music's quiet nowadays, like so much of it, synthesizers and whispering vocals, and just of course
MR metal.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I've almost never liked what's on the top 40. I mean, if you look at like classic, like over like the last 50 or 60 years, what's in the top 40, and there have been times when there's something cool up there, but mostly it's pretty lame stuff. Top people are, every once in a while something will slip through, like Nirvana, or back in the 60s, of course, everything was new, and so it was kind of like, like
exactly. Yep.
Like, you could do anything with 3 chords and like write, something that nobody even imagined.
Yeah, everything sounded new, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. Rock music's a really old genre now. It's been around, in its present form, at least since, the mid 60s, when it kind of moved from rock and roll to like, folk rock, and that's sort of what it became.
Yeah,
like,
I would kind of, there's a clear definition to me between straight up like what you would call rockabilly now, like Carl Perkins and stuff like that, and the Beatles.
Yeah. I think it was really, I think what happened.
Maybe Chuck Berry was the closest to the Beatles as far as having that 4/4 beat, but
but
that became standardized.
The Beatles and a lot of other bands and people like Bob Dylan sort of moving from, an entertainment song to more of a serious, poetic sort of idea.
Yeah.
And has that. And that's why I consider, more of an art form as opposed to just, throwaway entertainment. I remember old interviews with Pete Townsend about like how, if he thought his music had any like lasting value, or like, is it, it's just crap, like it's like nobody's in 10 years or something. That's probably not true.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
It turned into an outlet for, people who are artists, music, to do something that's not just like, it's not just like jazz, it's not just musical, and it's not just like literature, because it's got music combined, and it's, an art form, and that's, how
I think it was a free art form for the most part, and it still is to a large degree.
Yeah, and it's just hard because it's so old to come up with something new. But I think a lot of bands are coming up with new stuff nowadays. I mean, a few years ago, I realized that I'd been listening to nothing but stuff that was like, like 50 years old. and it's hard when you're, when you get older and things like seem like, think like, oh yeah, the album came out in 1995. That's pretty new.
Yeah, I still think like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I kind of had to like move my mind into a place where, wait, now, it's 2020 or so. And, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since I was around, but, I listened to stuff over the years, some, but not a lot. But the last 2 or 3 years, I've listened to a lot more new stuff. And like the band I really like right now is Frankie and the Witch Fingers. They're like right up my alley, like psychedelic, kind of like punky. And they've had several records since I think like 2012 or 13.
Okay.
They're, but you know, it's nice to be able to find new stuff that I like a lot because it kind of restores my faith in, like, you know, I've heard a bunch of, you know, older artists like myself, you know, say like rock music's dead. It's like, well, if you go, like I said, if you go to the top 40 or just like what is press, well, maybe it is, but there's plenty of people doing their own thing. And I think the problem with a lot of bands is they expect to be able to somehow make a living at the music. I know, and it's just not real possible to do. Even, you know, back when we started, we never ever thought we would be able to, and we never did completely, but we got closer than 99.9% of the bands did to making a living. You know, we made some money.
Yeah.
I managed to, you know, but and then managed to actually have albums and be a real band. That was like the main thing to us. And that's when we got an SST in the 80s, late 80s, you know, we were able to just do records and tour and be a band. Then it wasn't until we got on Epic in like the early 90s that it was suddenly like, hey, maybe we actually could go further and make a living in this, because a few bands were doing that, but not very many. But, you know, it's a real like carrot in front of the face, chasing the carrot. And, you know, we did it for like about 10 years, from 1990 to 2000, when we broke up. And it was like, well, we, you know, did make enough money to kind of live on, sort of, but we had to, it was constantly like, where's this money coming from? We don't know. Are we going to get some money here? I don't know. And, and, you know, nowadays we make a little bit of money, which is cool, because I never thought, you know, like I'd probably make something like $10,000, $15,000 a year from the Screaming Trees, which is way more than I ever imagined I would, you know, royalties and stuff, be able to make, like when I first started, because the only thing I wanted to do was like have a band and like make records. But
living out the dream still, you know.
Yeah, so a lot of the newer bands are like, you know, I feel bad because on one hand, it's like things are so different in the music industry, you know, as far as selling records, because selling records is nowadays is never gonna make you any money because nobody buys them. Some people buy vinyl, but that stuff's expensive, man.
It is.
Make vinyl so expensive, and I feel like, you know, the vinyl resurgence is great, and I love it, and I like to have, you know, like it makes it feel like it's a real thing when you have the vinyl. But I've noticed a trend that people almost seem like they care more about the vinyl than they do the music on the vinyl, you know. And there's some,
I care about both.
Yeah, I mean, they're really
a package deal.
Yeah, they are. I mean, but amazing colored vinyl sets of stuff coming out, you know.
Oh my God.
Like amazing packaging, but man, it really costs a lot to make that stuff. I can't, you know, just
it's really shitty for collectors and completists, especially. There's completists and there's collectors.
Yeah, like
I feel bad for the completists. Their kids ain't going to college.
Or some of the bands that really have a lot of stuff, like King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, and also the OCs. The OCs, I can't figure out what their name is right at the moment. There's the name still OCs? Is that what it is? But yeah, they come out with so much stuff and so much different vinyl. And I'm like on both like a couple groups for the OCs and King Gizzard. And people are just like, you know, I haven't got this, or I got to get this. And it's just like, yeah, you know, this is great. But the music's pretty cool. So I don't know. I just noticed that as a trend, which, you know, it probably could get worse over the years. People won't even, they'll just like it'll be like action figures. Like people collect the action figures, they won't take them out of the box. The record. It looks too good.
I'm one of those collectors that, you know, when I buy something on an analog format, I intend to play it.
Yeah, that's what I just never. I'm too lazy to play vinyl. I mean,
like there's so many people that would freak out that the brand new Paul McCartney album I got on cassette today And I literally looked at my wife and I said, do you want to watch me like make a bunch of freaking completists really mad just by opening the shrink wrap up here?
On that too. I mean, cassettes are like cool. But I personally, you know, the main thing I like about formats, you know, physical formats, is just because I like my records come out on, and I don't spend, even though we still got a whole ton of vinyl. My wife, I lost all my vinyl moving back and forth all over the place in the 90s. I got about 50 records left, but my wife still has like a couple thousand records. We got about half of them out in the front room, but I never listened to them. I pulled them out a long time ago, but I just, you know, I use digital, like mostly YouTube and Spotify. And it's just, you know, because I don't want to, I guess I'm just lazy. Don't like that.
I agree. I agree with you there. Like with records, like vinyl, it's a lot of work in between. Like even with just a CD, you just pop it in and it's good to go for however long you want it to go. Like with records, you just, it's too clumsy a little bit.
Yeah, for some, I look at it as a ritual. It's all, there's something sexual about putting the needle in the groove.
You know, I think you're more likely to sit down and listen to it and not do something else if it's vinyl.
Yeah,
that's exactly. I listen to a lot of music like every day. I usually listen to something, you know, but when I'm on the computer usually, and it's like, you know, I'm usually doing something else, so I don't pay as much attention. Where it used to be, I put on a record and I would usually just sit down and listen to it. You know, sure, that's a way with lots of people, you know, nowadays, because the music's sort of just in the background. But things have, I mean, you know, the technology's changed the way people listen to music, the way people buy music, and the whole music industry. And either you can just say this all sucks and it was better, you know, good old days, or you can just like go with it and like, you know, enjoy the music. I mean, because that's, you know, what it comes down to is the music's still there no matter what format it's in. I mean, I know a lot of people do like all old analog stuff recording wise, but I use everything I do is like on my computer, and I use I was on Revelations of Fuzz. I tried using some of my amps. I got like a couple old amps. I got an old Supro and then a newer Vox amp, a couple newer Vox amps, but I just could not get the sound I wanted to, compared to like I usually use Amplitude. And it was like these sound from the Amplitude sound way better, but I want to do analog, like, you know, sound for my guitar. I was like, well, I'm just going to go for what sounds better. So there's a little bit of guitar amp stuff here and there, actual amps mic'd, but most of it is the Amplitude thing. And I use, you know, for keyboards, it's all like pretty much sample things, you know, like the Mellotrons and organs and stuff like that. Are like sampled. And the drums are all a drum program called Addictive Drums, which are drum samples that you can get
to piece together the beats for however long, and then piece together that.
Yeah, I've got really good at doing it. I use actually a Cakewalk is the digital audio workstation I use, and I started using it way back because I didn't know, you know, should I get Pro Tools or whatever. I didn't bother with that because it was way more expensive. And Cakewalk was now it's like completely free. It was originally Roland, and it was one of the earliest digital workstations, and then it went to back about 5 years ago, Gibson bought it, but they just like bought it and dropped it and didn't do anything with it. But then a company named BandLab bought it and put it online for free, and they've been updating it and doing like, you know, tweaks on it and stuff. And you don't get all like the extra VST instruments and effects and stuff, but you get the basic thing, and it's really easy to use. And you know, you can take the files and put them into Pro Tools if you're mixing. I actually did that with the one record I had mixed by somebody else was Ether Trippers. It came out in 2016. Jack and Dino mixed it for me. I was surprised. I thought he would. I know he had a lot of trouble like with noise on the track, so I'm like, well, right, noise all over the place. But I thought he'd be like freaked out about the drum machine thing, but he like was like, oh yeah, this is cool. You know? Into analog, he does things like, I know he still does stuff like he likes was it 2-inch 16-track tape is like his favorite thing. And I know he'll still, at least a few years ago, do like record the drums on the tape on, you know, to tape on the 16 track 2-inch, and then like, you know, put all that in the Pro Tools. So you have the analog drum part, and then put it in the Pro Tools to do everything else. But yeah, I've never
sounds like the way I'm recording my record collection, but a lot of extra steps.
Yeah. But I mean, this is any way you put it, all music on the computer is all just recorded into WAV files. And it's just how you collect them together. That's like what all the digital audio workstation does. You know, so as long as you, like I was saying the other day, we were talking about like recording the thing, is all you have to do is just have a WAV file that's, you know, zeroed out to the same place as all the other ones, and you just stick it right in any workstation you have.
Because I'm going to be doing that whenever I get the equipment. I'm still waiting on my tax. Lovely.
Yeah, but yeah, computers are, I always think it was funny because way back the first Boston record, it came out, it had was it the first record or the second record? It said, because they got people accused them, I don't know what kind of computers they thought they were using back then in mid-70s, but it said computers use. So I should be all computers use.
Yeah, I remember reading that in the liner notes as well. They said about that. I can't remember if it was the first album or the second album either.
Yeah, it might have been the second one because they probably got accused of the first one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they used plenty of studio trickery, but I don't know. Computers didn't really come into it until mid-'80s, when stuff like well, the 80s. The one reason that the 80s music sounds sort of bad sometimes is because people were using all this new technology. It was still like not very, you know, it was brand new, like all the digital reverbs and digital stuff like that. And it wasn't, what do you call it? Like the resolution wasn't high enough yet.
Yeah.
Digital photography, you know, up to a certain point, it was like, you know, you can still kind of see pixels here or there. It was kind of like that with the reverb, you know? And then you have that horrible gated reverb drum sound. I don't know if you know, but that's ruined so many good recordings of that. Boom, boom, you cut the off right away. It makes this huge, gigantic snare drum sound.
There's actually a few records I could think of off the top of my head that come straight to mind when you mention that.
Yeah,
Revolution by Night by Blue Oyster Cult and Ram It Down by Judas Priest. Both of them used a lot of synth and drum machines, and the album suffers because of that.
Indie underground bands are the same problem though, because like people would be like, you know, using the same technology like in the studio, but there'd be like a smaller band, and you know, they've ruined the record because of that. On our very first record, Clairvoyance, like Steve Fisk used this weird trick where what did he do? He used a white noise for the snare. He added it to the snare. So there's like white noise gated, added in with the snare, and also like a tone with the bass drum. I don't know. I think he kind of mixed it together. He was like really into weird studio trickery and stuff like that. That one seemed a little overkill. But like talking about the technology in the 80s, like when we did that record, we finally got it done and we mixed it onto regular tape like you would, you know, at a 1/4-inch tape, 2 tracks, like you usually would. But for some reason, we had it, I think we also mixed it onto this brand new, it was like a DAT machine, but it was like had a encoder that encoded the audio, the analog audio into digital, and then it would record it onto videotapes, like
Betamax, right?
Betamax, I think it was Betamax. And so all these mixes were on Betamax, and then put back onto like 2-inch, or not 2-inch, 1/4-inch to get it mastered. I don't know why they did that, but it was like they were trying to, you know, I don't know if it affected the sound any, but actually, you know, like when on CDs it shows like this stuff is like, I think there's like a code like analog or digital, and it's like AAA if it's all analog, or ADD. But if you put that on that record, it would be digitally mixed, I guess. It was like analog recorded and digitally mixed, then analog mastered. Doesn't make
It was
any
like one of the first digitally mixed records.
right. Yeah. And it was
1986, right?
yeah. So that's like an example of like people using the technology just because it was there. I don't know why Steve decided to do that, but it's kind of crazy. So I don't know. I don't know if we have the those
You need to
tapes.
find that VHS tape.
Yeah, well, that was when we paid for that record was we because we had a video store in Ellensburg, Neural Video, where we practiced and we all worked there. And my family just opened it a couple years before the band started, and we sold VCRs and stuff, and we actually like got a couple of like real high end. I think they might have been Beta. Were they Beta Max? I think they might have been, and traded them like for studio time. Like they were like $1,000. Yeah, because we still had to pay for our studio time at Velvet Town, even though like a record label, a name, and they did quite a bit to try to promote the record, send it to college radio stations and stuff.
Now, you're from Ellensburg. I want to make that a point because
Yeah.
one thing I want Krash here to learn is that not every band that's from Washington State that was slapped with that nice grunge label by the media was from Seattle.
Not very many. In fact, a lot of them are from, Nirvana was from Aberdeen.
Yeah.
And
Melvins were too, right?
A lot of the guys in Tad were from out of town. Tad was from Idaho. And also like Dan Peters, who was in, several different bands, Mudhoney, and he was from Stanwood, which is about 100 miles north of Seattle. So yeah, and the thing with us is like, even though a lot of the bands were from other towns outside of Seattle, we're not just from outside Seattle, but Washington's like split in half. It's like the mountains, and there's Eastern Washington and Western Washington. We're in Eastern Washington over the mountains. And it's not near as, it's 100 miles, so it's not that far to Seattle, but in the winter, like it's really hard to drive over the pass because of the snow and stuff. So, I didn't have any idea anything was even going on in Seattle when we started the band. We didn't even know.
When was the first time you guys actually played in Seattle then?
I think we did play one in '87. We played in Seattle at a place called, what was it called? The Rainbow, right? Opening for some band called Danger Buddy. It was like, I don't think some few people might have came down to see it, but we were just opening for them. And it was like something Steve Fisk set up for us. And that was the first time we played in Seattle. Then we were supposed to open for the Butthole Surfers, but somehow we didn't open for them, right? At the end of our first US tour in 1987. That would have been our first kind of like people, show where the people in the Seattle scene would have seen us, but we didn't do it. So we never played in Seattle too much at all, really, maybe like once or twice a year at the most. Yeah. And I think that kind of helped us. We kind of had this mystery about us, and then other people in Seattle bands were like, who the heck are these Screaming Trees? How the hell did they get on SST Records? It's like, yeah, we were definitely probably the most outsider band of all the bands in Seattle, because when we didn't live in Seattle until Lanigan moved over there, something like late '88, and Pickerel moved over there. We finally, by the early '90s, we all lived over there. But it was,
or your cameos in the Singles movie with Matt Damon, right?
Yeah, that was a lucky break, I guess, getting on the Singles.
I have to admit, I love the campiness of the movie. It's absolute cheese and terrible, but
yeah, if they would have got rid of the whole romantic comedy part, it would have been a lot better.
Yeah.
That part's just typical bullshit romantic comedy thing. But,
yeah, although that dude who acts like he's in one of the bands really pisses me off because it makes you all look like idiots.
I saw it when it first came out. They had a special screening that we went to.
Was Lanigan there?
No, because I was in New York, and he wasn't
okay.
there. For some reason my wife and I got to go to the screening of it. It was right when it first came out. But, we didn't even know we were going to get on it. I didn't even know what it was really, because I hadn't lived in Seattle very long. I think I might have heard they were filming something or something, but I was most of '91. I guess I was in Seattle, and but most of the time I was like writing songs for Sweet Oblivion with the rest of the band. So I did go to quite a few club shows and stuff like that at that time. But, yeah, so I remember hearing that they were doing something, but then like after the record was all done and we were already touring a little bit. We did a lot of overseas touring in the summer of '92, like the Reading show.
Yeah, I turned a year old the day you guys played that.
Yeah. Then we heard like, oh, we can get on the soundtrack, and I didn't know it. So, okay, that's, you know, didn't realize it was gonna be that big a deal. And it helped the single a lot. Although it was weird because when we got on MTV for it, we had to share the plays with Paul Westerberg. And so even though we were at the supposed buzz clip or buzz bin or whatever the hell they call it at that point, we only got half as many plays because of some deal with the record companies. I mean, I don't know, record deals with MTV probably. I mean, that was when the waning years of when MTV really made a difference. But, you know, I remember at the time it was like, wow, if we can get the buzz bin or the buzz clip or whatever, we'll like sell. And it did work to a certain extent. And, you know, it's weird also. Oh, sorry.
It's all good.
Let's see.
Hey, at least you know, no editing, no bullshit.
Yeah.
Lucy, your tail's on the way. I ran out of cat. Wait. Okay. So anyway,
I got 5 of them.
single soundtrack. Yeah, a couple months into our tours in the fall, we were like, of '92, our manager was like, "Hey, you guys actually have a hit with Austin or something." And you know, and it's weird how things don't translate into record sales. I mean, compared to most of the other bands that were like, you know, the Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, all those big bands, and we didn't sell near as many records as they did. We didn't even make a gold record. We probably sold, I don't even know the exact numbers. I just know that I've read that supposedly we sold 300,000. This was way back then. We probably sold more than that now of Sweet Oblivion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, for us, that was like, what? That's the hell, or, you know, more than we ever did. So,
Well, it's like when Chris talked about Nirvana getting signed. He's like, I thought they had shopping bags full of money.
yeah.
Like,
Well, see, that's the thing people don't understand. When you get a record deal, you got $1 million record deal. Well, most of that money is going for recording the record and a bunch of other stuff like that. It's not like it goes in your pocket. And different record companies are, you know, like Epic never wanted to give us hardly any money to live on, you know, like some record companies give you money to live on, but they were always weird about that. And wouldn't, you know, like, because, you know, it's like when you're touring the whole year, you can't have a job.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to come back for 2 weeks and have a job and then go back on tour. Sorry. Work, you know, and it's a really full-time job. Being in the band before wasn't a full-time job. It was like, you know, it was like we could make it a full-time job if we like, well, we want to, but it would be like, you know, we were all working. Most of us worked at the New World Video at some point. But
yeah, Mark did, didn't he?
yeah, everyone. Yeah, well, that was, you know, a lot of, besides practicing there, like when we worked there, we used to listen to a lot of music and stuff, and talk about what we were going to do, I suppose, and stuff like that. But
So I wanted to ask you a question off of your about an inspiration of a song that you have. I believe it's the last song on your Opposite of Christmas album, called Rock Slide. Is there a story to that song?
Yeah. Like, yeah, it's about the 90, what year was that? 92? I guess it was 92. Yeah, 92. It was
I told him to ask you this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the festival in Denmark. Roskilde was the name of the festival. But Van, before we got there, he kept calling it Rock Slide every time. Because it looks like it's Roskilde. And of course, the Rock Slide DE is like Denmark, I guess was the idea. So yeah, and that was what happened It was a really big, like 70,000 people or something like that, huge festival, biggest thing we'd ever done. And it was Nirvana and Pearl Jam. It was like, you know, summer '92, so they were the biggest bands ever. And we were
Beatles.
Yeah, and Kurt was like, you know, we're gonna have the Screaming Trees play after us, like late, because because he liked us so much, he was trying to do us a favor. So we're like, okay. So it was like, you know, we went on pretty late. Anyway, so 1,000 people, and it went okay. We played most of the set, probably like 6, 7, 8 songs. And then right about, I can't remember what song, we were either doing Changes Come or Ivy or something.
Yeah, it's like you started off playing Changes Come, but he went into Ivy according to the footage.
Right. But that Mark was having some kind of problem with his monitors. I don't know. He's always having problems with his monitors, but he was really pissed off about it. And like he was trying to get him to change them. He wasn't singing, and we were keep playing, and he like started trying to push the monitors off the stage, and then the stage hands came and like started fighting with him. And he's gotten, I don't know if there were any actual blows, but it looks like there's a video of it on YouTube, and people were trying to stop him from push the monitors off, and he was having a fight with them while we were just keeping playing. And then finally we just started smashing everything, because it was like, well, this Barrett Smish's drum set, and like
according to some official record, TV camera was smashed.
Yeah, was what the aftermath of it was. Yeah, the aftermath was when he apparently did knock the monitor off, and it smashed like a $10,000 TV camera, which we paid for with we had tour insurance. At least somebody like had enough, like we had that manager that. But apparently our tour insurance somehow paid for that. I'm surprised they did. It's like the singer intentionally knocked the monitor off and smashed a $10,000 TV camera. So people at the festival were so pissed at Lanigan, and he like ran out. And then after the show, right off to the bat, he went and destroyed the dressing room, just smashed everything up. And then he had to run and hide. I don't know where the hell he hid, but everyone else, we went and saw a bunch of other bands that night. I think we saw Helmet, was it maybe Teenage Fan Club? I can't remember. You know, everyone else had a really good time. So I have a fond memories of it, because it was in Denmark in the middle of summer, and it didn't even get dark. You know, it was like twilight at 2 a.m. So
nice. That had to be amazing, despite,
Oh yeah, that was cool. That was the only time we went to Scandinavia. We went to Scandinavia several times in the winter, but that's the time we got to go in the summer.
So speaking of bands that you played with, then I want to slide this quick question in. What is there a band that you play with, like say Alice in Chains or Nirvana, that brought like their own type of fan into the show with them, and
oh yeah,
that really like surprised you with their energy, or that really like gave you a warm welcome?
Let's see. There's just several different. How Alice Cooper was interesting. That was like we opened for Alice Cooper. This was a way back in the early days, like in '88, very beginning of '88. We got a call it was one show in Montana, the college in Missoula, Montana, and we get a call. It's like, hey, come over to Missoula, Montana, and open for Alice Cooper, because I think it was Motorhead was on the tour, but they had trouble getting back in the United States from Canada or something like that, and so they just opened, and we were probably the closest band that somebody thought of to Missoula, Montana, because we were in Ellensburg still, which is still a ways. It was like probably 3 or 4. So we went over there, and there.
You both have trees.
Yeah. Trees there too. So, yeah, it was on his, and it was his like 80s comeback thing.
Yeah.
And there was a big crowd, and we set our little tiny amps up in front of all the had the full on stage props and the hanging thing and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, his guitar player was, what was his name? Kane Roberts. He used Kane
Roberts. Yep.
Guitar. Yeah. So that was interesting. But yeah, people actually, there were a few Trees fans in the crowd, and we didn't get booed or anything. There was actually people like, yeah, you know, so that was interesting.
Yeah.
So, but that was quite a, yeah, there's a picture of Lanigan somewhere standing in front of the marquee. It's like Alice Cooper. I can't remember if it says Scream the Trees or not on it, but yeah. Also Change was probably interesting too, because people don't, you know, them being such a big part of the grunge thing now, they were definitely, you know, I thought they were more of a metal band too. And so
yeah, and you can definitely hear that on their first album, Facelift.
Yeah, well, it's because of where they came from. I mean, they were from like the North Seattle, like kind of metal scene. You know, they weren't.
Yeah, explain that for Trev a bit, or
yeah, or they were a little bit. You can see that and hear that in a lot of their music. But on the other hand, they definitely had a thing of their own going. It really wasn't like any of the other Seattle bands. You know, I think that's, in fact, like I think Dirt's probably one of my favorite albums from that time. You know.
Yeah, it's an amazing record, even to this day.
And Lane's got had an amazing voice. But yeah, so I think because of that, a lot of their fans tended to be more in the metal sort of vein, especially back then, because, you know, you were coming, it was like 1992, and, you know, 2 years before, metal, the hair metal was like the biggest thing in music, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years, but it was on the wane by that time for sure. But you know, there were still plenty of fans that thought Alice in Chains, but you know, but by the time we toured with him, Lane had short hair and didn't look, you know.
Yeah.
Didn't he dye it pink too at some point?
He had all sorts of different hairs going on there, I guess. I don't know. It's funny, some people, like, you know, who start out having really long hair, it's like, I guess they just don't like long hair, and they like cut it and they kept it short. You know, I don't know. I've had long hair since I was in like third grade or something. Well, when I was in a punk and new wave, like in the early 80s, but after that I grew it back out. So but yeah, hair is funny with rock music. There was one point where, I mean, you know, like in the late 80s, or I mean late 70s, when all the like big bands, you know, like arena rock, like they're like, we better cut our hair some. So they'd like sort of cut their hair some. Like,
Kiss did that for the Elder too.
Yeah, exactly. Like Gene Simmons has a kind of like halfway. They're not.
Yeah, with that braided ponytail thing going on one side.
They're not ready to shave their heads, but they're like. But it was funny because in 1991 or 2, because a lot of the bands in Seattle had really long hair. I remember a lot of the bands all of a sudden, like Mudhoney started it, so they started cutting their hair short. Like probably if you look at videos of Mudhoney from like 91 or 92. Like a lot of them have shorter hair, except Lucan kind of went the halfway.
Yeah. I would love to have a beer with Lucan.
Oh yeah, man. He was a really fun guy to hang out with. I don't know what he does now. I mean, Van's seen him a few times, and he looks so damn old. He looks like he's about 90 years old. I mean, it's funny. Funny how some people look like they're really old when they're like, you know, like I'm a little bit older than most of the people. I'm like 58, and the medium age of the people like in Seattle is probably like, you know, they're born in maybe 65 to 68, but a few people.
I was gonna say Fisk is a few years older than you then.
Yeah, he's older than me. I was born in 62. Fisk is probably, he must be like 5 years older than me or something like that. He came from
somewhere around there, I'm thinking.
Your generation. But yeah, I was always friends with people who were younger than me anyway. So like, and then Van, weird because Van's 4.5 years younger than me, and we're like we had when I was like a baby in between that like died when it was like 2 or 3 days old. So, you know, most people's brothers and sisters like 2 or 3 years apart, but we're like a little more. But yeah, Van's like pretty much the typical age for most of he's like what the typical medium age, like about the same age as Kurt Cobain. Seemed like about the age of the people in most.
So early 50s, roughly.
Yeah, mid to early 50s. A few people who are a little bit older like
me.
Once again, Kurt Cobain sets the record there for him.
Yeah.
Everything circles to that. When I interviewed Chad Channing recently, I actually asked John Hurt to go first because we already know what Chad did at that point.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Obviously, I don't know why. When did Chad leave? Did they kick him out? like in the early days, I was like always, thought of him as a drummer, and then because I got into him.
It was like right around 90.
Yeah.
Like they had already written and recorded with, I think, Steve Fisk, I think, was recording some demos.
Right. Yeah, it would have been because
they already did something with Butch Vig, and then they came back with Dave Grohl. And
yeah, because I saw him at the Moore, and Dale Crover was playing drums with him. And then that was right around Sliver came out when Peters.
He was always their go-to drummer when they had an in-between period.
I know. Well, he played stuff on Bleach. I didn't realize that 2 years later, but he played on Bleach.
Yeah, Floyd the Barber, and Downer, I think.
Yeah. So
I didn't know Chad played on the single version of Dives, though. I didn't know that.
Oh, did he? I didn't know that either. I thought it was all
on the back single. Dan Peters played on Sliver, and then Chad Channing's credited as the drums on Dive. Because I had heard several versions of it with him, and I always thought it was Grohl on the master, but no, that's Chad.
Yeah, I know drummers always are so like here and there, like
yeah,
because they're in the back. I don't know. It's tough with I don't know why Pickerel quit the band. I mean, he quit. He didn't get kicked out. But we went through. First of all, Sean Hollister was a friend of ours from Ellensburg, and then later Dan Peters, and then finally Barrett. So, but that was a couple of period there where we were sort of half, didn't quite have a drummer that was a member of the band. In fact, they even took some pictures. On the album Pickerel's on it, but some of the pictures they took there was like a promo picture with just the three of us for Epic. Like I think it was our first Epic promo picture. Was a real similar picture to the that's on the back, kind of that band sort of looking picture of the four of us.
Yeah.
But there was with the three of us that was the promo picture because Pickerel wasn't in the band anymore. So
I think that's on the back of the EP, isn't it?
maybe that's what it. Yeah, that could be. That's what it could be. So,
one thing I want you to mention real quick, especially before we get too far into the chronological, explain the time you guys ended up playing with Firehouse.
Oh God, that was.
Yeah.
We didn't
I'd like to hear this.
Yeah, well, we were just on tour, and when was that? It was probably sometime I think it must have been the spring of '93. I think we were doing our own like tour for Sweet Oblivion, and we showed up in North Carolina, and we didn't know we were playing with Firehouse or really think about who they were because we're used to Fire Hose, really different than Mike Watt and George Hurley, and so it was a big gym in a college. So we get in there and we're like, oh, you're opening for Firehouse. We're like, oh, really? Okay. So we didn't think much about it. We just knew there's some metal band, right? That was kind of, and it was funny because, quite a few people, I don't know, it wasn't totally packed, but there must have been at least a couple hundred people. I don't have a real good memory about it, but who came to see us. But they didn't stay for Firehouse, and they were probably like, maybe more people came in for them, but people left like after we played. I think we left too, watching Firehouse. So it was just kind of like, things like that happen once in a while. Things like bands get together on tour that you wouldn't think of.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty odd bill, to see both of them at the same time, same place. But
oh yeah, it was just out in the middle of nowhere too, outside of Charlotte somewhere at a college.
That's how much it was dying, dude. Firehouse was playing a fucking college.
Yeah.
Gymnasium.
Well, yeah, you're talking what, 93? You said that's
arenas just before. Yeah, people those bands really kind of. I feel sorry for a lot of them, but they just were so focused on image. It's just like we're so focused on our image that we don't really care too much about anything else. I mean, all the big hair and all that stuff and all those bands. And then musically, some of them. I know you like Enough's Enough. I kind of like that band. I remember.
Yeah, they kind of remind me like the Screaming Trees were to grunge what Enough's Enough is to glam, because they have that psychedelic element, sort of.
But it's like with any major label stuff, they just like the major labels like, we want to get this type of band because this is what's big. So that's what a lot of stuff was.
That's why Donnie V left Enough's Enough, the singer, because he didn't like the way Beavis and Butthead made fun of them for their appearance.
I wonder if they ever did a video us. I don't know if they did.
I don't think they did, but they did a lot. It's weird that they didn't, because they even reacted to like Napalm Death and a lot of weird other shit I'd never heard anywhere else.
That might have been late for him or something. I don't know. That's fun. But so yeah, I was never into hair metal too much. I don't know. Found it really it was really commercial. That was probably part of it. It's just like,
well, after a while, the rebellion wears off when it's just everywhere and accepted. You got to do something totally different to shake anything back up.
Yeah.
So
we're like not quite what they look like. Twisted Sister was like, when you thought about it back then, you see them, what's the deal with them? Are they like a hair band that's like, are they not? But they were more like, came out of the later 70s New York scene and shit like that. So they were more like,
like they were more into like the New York Dolls and the street level stuff and the Judas Priest and the heavier.
It's a little like a dick, something like that. And their music was also more hard
Mark
rock.
Mendoza, their bass player that joined like right around the time they got signed and shit, was actually in the Dictators, I think.
Really?
For a time. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, well, music was more hard rock than like hair metal.
Yeah, more AC/DC, Judas Priest. That was one of their problems.
Yeah. But so hair metal was gone, and they were all pissed off. All the grunge. So I remember like people like Sebastian Bach. I think he's about either Nirvana or somebody, or I know that didn't. Well, Guns N' Roses is a weird one too. They weren't really a hair band, although they had first. But
I've heard people say they're more grunge than you think, and I still wouldn't call them grunge, but I think Duff had a lot to do with it.
Got much more in common with a band like maybe Aerosmith or something like that.
They're good street level 70s style rock band with punk added.
And I never realized how much like Duff though had much more in common with a lot of being from Seattle and stuff. In fact, just recently there's like a thing of his first band. What was it called?
10-Minute Warning or the Farts.
Yeah. His albums come out. He was definitely around back in the early days, way before us in Seattle.
Yeah.
When what was going on in Seattle. So.
Well, I that was one of my other questions too. Speaking of like how we just did about like how the hair metal, like how it kind of began, how it kind of died off. What was the story like with how grunge started? Like what was the bomb that blew it up, and then what kind of killed it at the end? What shifted it to not being cool anymore?
Well, it was twofold. Well, because like, first of all, in the 80s, there was punk. First, there was like punk rock. It was the English punk rock, and then there was the New York punk rock, and then there was like LA hardcore stuff like Black Flag. And all those bands kind of were a precursor to a lot of the other music that came out in the 80s. So basically what happened after a lot of the hardcore bands kind of started, branching out and doing music that was a little different. Like, Black Flag started doing like slower, sludgy.
Like My War, right?
Right. They grew their hair. I remember seeing like.
Which is funny because that's right around the time they signed St. Vitus to SST, like a year or two before you guys were.
Yeah, there was so it was, and suddenly by, the mid 80s, it was not just punk rock. There was a whole bunch of bands doing all sorts of different, it was all stuff from all genres, metal, from power pop, 60s stuff, punk rock, new wave, and they were all like being like, some bands were a little bit more one way than another way, and there were all these different bands. I think that's sort of a little bit of an overlooked time, and I think that book, I don't even remember who the author is, but I posted
Mark Yarm.
No, it's a new one that I just posted as a picture. It's a cartoon picture of a whole bunch of people, including me. I was like, they drew a picture cover. That's like That looks like a really cool book. It's about like the synthesis of all the different genres of music of all the bands through the early 80s.
It's not a grunge book. It's about the alternative.
Right. It's totally like the indie alternative, whatever you want to call it. So maybe underground. So
a missing piece of rock history, really.
So you have all the bands, Sonic Youth, ones that are SST, Husker Du, Meat Puppets, bands that aren't SST, probably, I don't know. There's a million different ones. I could never name all of them.
Well, but didn't like Girl Trouble and other bands from other areas of Washington State that have a distinctive sound completely different, like around the same time?
Right. There were like all, so there was a lot of bands that had really distinctive sounds. They were like their own thing. Probably
especially like the Wipers and Beat Happening and stuff that. Dead Moon.
Yeah, I think probably more than any other time in music history of rock music, the mid 80s and late 80s were a time where all sorts of different bands were doing their own kind of music that wasn't like, oh, let's be a punk rock band. It wasn't like that at all. It was like, we like, these 10 different bands and we'll like do this music and it sounds sort of like one or the other. And then, it's a synthesis of all these different things. So that like became a big thing. And the thing that like caused that to get into people's like, record collections or to hear it was college radio. It's sort of people don't talk about college radio anymore, but that college radio is why the stuff happened in the 90s, because in the 80s, that's where the audience was all over the country. All those little tiny record companies like SST and Twin Tone, Matador, they were like calling the college radio stations up, sending them the records. That's where the audience was. And I always like figured there must have been maybe 50,000 people or so that were music fans that had some, there was probably more with the college radio people listening, but they would buy the records because, considering how many records sold and stuff back then in the United States anyway, might have a little more or less in Europe. But those bands like got played on college radio and people, got to know them. And what usually happens is when there's some kind of like music scene, it wasn't just a music scene in one place, it was a music scene all over the country, is that major labels sort of start seeing that and saying, maybe we should sign some of these bands. So, in the late 80s, some bands started getting signed, like the Meat Puppets were one of the first one I remember from, and probably Sonic Youth, and a few bands. And that was right about the time, we were on SST and we were like, well, we're going to keep going in SST, give it up, or maybe we should try to get a major label. That was when, we decided that too. And, there wasn't like, oh, this is going to like, propel us into some huge, like arena rock thing, because it wasn't, nothing like that had ever happened except for, I don't know, maybe in the 60s, when a whole bunch of bands of the same kind of bands like got huge, but it did happen then in the 90s. So, a couple later. So we had all these bands that played on college radio. And at the same time, there's also a big buzz of stuff coming from England, and like the magazines like Melody Maker and was the Enemy and like Ever True, who would write stuff on it. That stuff would like blow back in the United States. And by the time Sub Pop was starting to get kind of popular in the underground in 1990 or so, we were starting to see all these like, magazines writing all this like really, Nirvana is the hugest thing ever, blah, blah, blah. And stuff, but that wasn't translating into like millions of records or anything. It was translated into like tens of thousands of records or something like that. So it was still the low level. But it was like, oh man, like everything's, like the whole, but what we're doing, we're part of it, this underground scene of music where people are doing whatever they want to, and it's not like one type of, genre of music. That was getting big. But like I said, and you never could have predicted at a time that any bands, including Nirvana, would all of a sudden get that big. And I don't think Pearl Jam would have ever got big at all if it had been Nirvana. Nirvana was what clicked it, because they were like something that was like so genuine, and they were different than other bands. You know, they had just like all the other bands would. They did their own thing. They had a mixes of power pop and metal and punk, you know, and together came up with their own thing.
Yeah.
And plus Kurt just was a great songwriter too, you know. That helps. So that always helps. So he probably could have wrote songs in any genre, I suppose, you know.
And it's funny because when people say most of his lyrics don't mean anything, he's kind of admitted that for the first 2 records at the very least.
But that's what lyrics are, you know. Sometimes the worst lyrics are the ones that mean something, you know. It's like some people are good at that, but then a lot of bands, it seems real pretentious sometimes to try to write lyrics that are really about something, you know. It's more like, usually, at least when I write lyrics, a lot of them don't mean anything, but they usually have a deeper meaning that I could, you know, to me, and they might mean something else completely different to people who listen to the music. So sometimes, like, this song's like about this, and this is really, it is, you know. No,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
I think that's what set them apart too, was the fact that they straight up said they don't know why they're huge. They don't understand what's so great about them. They don't think they're the best band in the world, blah, blah, blah.
No, but I mean, yeah, I think that was part of the reason they were so big was because, but yeah, there was something about it, you know. It was like when I saw them the first time, it was in 1988, spring of 1988, they came to Ellensburg and played a really small show. There was maybe, I don't know, 10 people. There were not very many people there. And they had to stop playing because it got too late or something. There was a big altercation, like with the guy that was working at the place. It was like the city, Hal Holmes Center, the city civic center type place. And the guy was running it like a fight with Chris's girlfriend. It was like, but yeah, it was kind of nasty stuff going on. But when they played, I was just like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's like, you know, I thought it was like seeing the Who, or who they reminded me of was Blue Cheer. Because Kurt's this little tiny guy, you know, like the bass player for Blue Cheer with this big voice. And, you know, they're 3-piece. And especially with the guitar stuff, the part, you know, when the guitar solo is like, there's no support rhythm guitar. And then really, that's what it reminded me of Blue Cheer. But then, you know, also, I thought it must have been like a lot like seeing the Who in like 1964 when nobody heard of them, you know, because that, to me, it was really like that. I know a lot of people love to bash Nirvana nowadays, but, you know, I can see why, because of the huge hype about them. I was like, why are they so, why?
The same thing with the Beatles.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's people. Yeah,
same thing with Kiss.
Yeah.
It's like somehow becoming a phenomenon rather than just a band discredits you as a band.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, Kiss they definitely had their own, like, you know, I mean, they tried to unmask and the disco thing and all that stuff. They kind of rode some of the trends, but still, they were a great band. But
yeah, no, I understand I know what you mean with Kiss, though.
Any Kiss fan in his right mind knows there's an element of cheap.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, like with the Beatles. I mean, because they were, you know, they were so huge, and they're a commercial band, but they never seemed to affect what their music was like. It was like the people were listening to what they were doing to decide which way to go themselves.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, that's the thing. I think it's honestly because of how they had to record and how their albums sound compared to everyone else that's available nowadays. They're not thinking of it in the context of the times to really truly appreciate what the hell they did.
I mean, they had like most up until even like Sgt. Pepper's, like 4 tracks.
Yeah, I was telling Trevor they were using out-of-date equipment even in the 60s.
I know.
The first 2 records were done live in 10 hours.
Yeah. I know, it's crazy with
that's what makes those 2 records so great, as immature as the songs are. You can hear John's voice starting to give on Twist and Shout, and Paul shot, we got through it.
And also they were a big band because they've been doing all those shows in Germany, you know. I mean,
6 and 7 hour sets a night in Hamburg in the Kaiserkeller Club.
You know, all their
speed
kind of makes you forget great live band.
Yeah. So, well, you couldn't fucking hear them.
Yeah, I know.
So with
So-
so with grunge being big with Nirvana and you guys and Alice in Chains and everybody, what kind of like shifted it down then? Like, was it just because everyone says, oh, Kurt's death was basically what killed it, but I feel like there's possibly more of that. Was it just like no more promotional record label support after that? Or
Well, I think it was definitely the fault of the major labels, but it's always their fault when stuff gets. It was just there was too much of it. It was like once Nirvana got big, and
tell them the story of when they became big.
Huh?
Tell them the story real quick of the exact moment you remember everything changing.
December 31st, 91, the show the video that just came out a while back, the Halloween show at the Paramount Nirvana show. It was like that was when the old school like 80s, early 90s music scene like came to an end, because that was to me because we knew Nirvana album came out. They were on a major label, but a lot of the bands were on major labels. We were on a major label. So
Soundgarden was too.
Yeah, Soundgarden. And it was like, so anyway, that show, everyone was hanging out. All the bands were hanging out in the lobby of the Paramount, including Nirvana. And we're talking to Chris and Kurt, and they're saying, yeah, we sold 300,000 records in out to 2 months. And that was just like, man, that's insane. We just thought that's totally crazy. And that was like nothing, this was like, if it would have gone that far, it would have been like, okay, that was pretty cool. And then like they would have done a record and maybe I don't know, maybe it would have. But so, and the show was amazing. They were filming it, so it was kind of like people filming it were getting in the way. But yeah, this is one of the like most fond memories I have of music is like the very beginning of the show with Kurt with that green sweater coming out and with singing at the beginning of Jesus Don't Want Me for a Sunbeam.
A song that nobody knew what the hell it was.
Yeah, chills. Yeah, knows what's that song? It's like fucking. I think I'd heard it. I'd heard they put a something bootleg of it or something. I knew what it was, but
Trick or Treat, I think it was called, or something like that.
Right. So yeah, that show was like, could they have hung out at the front of the show after that? Probably not. And they kept touring at that point. And by the time, and we were so busy working on our record, we didn't think about it. Early '92. By the time that was when we finished Sweet Oblivion, probably like March or something in '92. By that time, we were kind of like, this is weird. Pearl Jam's like suddenly really big too, and so is Nirvana. Stuff from Seattle's big. Maybe we'll take advantage of it. We didn't really know how or what. But we were like at that point we were, not really thinking we were even part of the whole Seattle scene because we're living in Seattle at that point. We were from Ellensburg and not thinking that it
for you.
And musically, we weren't really that much like a lot of the other bands either. So. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but yeah, but I think what hurt it in the long run though, and what kind of like made the music scene, which happens probably everywhere when they have a music scene, is the overexposure. It was like every damn A&R guy in the whole universe was in Seattle in 1992, 93, looking for next Nirvana. And then, this band's the next Nirvana, that band's the next Nirvana. And, it's like people, they just throw anything at the wall. And a lot of bands got totally fucked over because of that. Like Love Battery, for instance, was a great band, in the history of Seattle scenes. And they were one of my favorite bands. We used to play with them all the time. They played at our wedding, my wife and I's wedding in 1990.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. But anyway, they got signed to, was it Polydor? I can't remember what label. But, they sold something like 4,000 records, which now actually would be a lot of records. Back then it was like, throw them away.
Yeah.
Can't, and, that happened to a lot of bands that were really good and were really, part of the stuff. But on the other hand, something like the Stone Temple Pilots, who weren't Seattle band, but they're
from San Diego, and you had Silverchair from Australia. Those group of kids.
I'm not sure. I've never. I think they might have opened for us when they were still Mighty Joe Young. I remember something about it. It was in New Orleans. It was some club, and I've never like been able to like figure, because it would probably be in how, I don't know when they switched their name to Stone Temple Pilots, but they were called Mighty Joe Young at first. But I remember when their stuff. What year did that come? Was it 93 when they're
92? I think.
Really got in there on the ground floor, but 92. Yeah. So, but I remember seeing the videos or hearing the songs and like, well, this one's like the Nirvana like song. This one's like the Pearl Jam song. This one's like the but they, you know, they did redeem themselves and they came out with some actually pretty good and different music on subsequent albums. So, and I wasn't, but that first album was just like a total, like, you know, it was like, and you know, that sometimes it happens, like when a band is really like, they weren't manufactured like the Monkees, but the Monkees are great, you know.
Yeah.
But the New Monkees, you ever hear the New Monkees in the 80s?
No, I did not.
Bullshit. Yeah, look up. I can't remember what their song was. It was like they had a single. Look it up on YouTube. It says I for some reason was looking at it the other, like a few weeks ago, and I was like, I can't believe how bad it has, that horrible drum sound. It's the worst song I ever heard in my life. Guys with like 80s haircuts and stuff. It's like you can capture things one time and try to redo them, you know. Yeah. But there was a lot of bands like that were like grunge. And the thing with grunge is nobody thought much about the term grunge, I don't think, except as a joke in the Seattle scene. And a lot of people just like, fuck grunge, you don't want to be called grunge or whatever. But, you know, at this point, so far in the future, it's just like, you know, it's grunge, whatever. We're part of the grunge scene. I'm not going to fight it. It's like,
hasn't done you any good fighting it for how many years?
Yeah, what good's it going to do to fight it? Just like go with it, you know, whatever. It was a genre of music that didn't mean to be a genre of music, you know. I mean, did too many like bands.
Mark Arm coin that term, saying his band Mudhoney's music was pure grunge, pure shit?
Yeah, that's the story I've heard. I don't know if that's, and it seems to make sense to me. I don't know. I don't remember when I heard the term grunge first, but it was probably sometime around 1989, 90. Probably after, I think probably by the time Mudhoney was around, that's when I started hearing the term grunge. And of course, the thing with people don't realize what Mudhoney is, like in the early days of Sub Pop, they were the big band. Nirvana was second, you know. Tad.
Now, Krash does like Mother Love Bone, and I mentioned they were considered to be the band that would break the scene wide open.
Yeah, but you know, that's the thing with the guys in Pearl Jam, and not Eddie Vedder, I don't know, but who were in Green River and Mother Love Bone, is that for some reason it always seemed to me like they were going for the big time, you know, like opposed to all the other bands in Seattle or a lot of the other bands.
Well, that's what broke Green River up, because they wanted to be, they were more on the pop metal side. They wanted to make it in music no matter what, where the guys in Mudhoney were like, hey, this is fun, let's get drunk and jam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
two totally different, you know.
Right. Yeah, totally different ideas on what music's about. I mean, yeah, I mean, I remember. I know people love Temple of the Dog now. I haven't listened to them too much, but I've heard several of the songs. I like them. I just never liked Eddie Vedder's voice very much for some reason. But way back when, I think, what year did that come out? 1990?
92, I believe it was.
92, whatever year it was. I remember reading the insert on it. I had a cassette, and I just like, I don't know. It just seems so commercial and sort of contrived. I smashed the cassette. I don't know why.
There's so many long drawn out ballads on that. And I understand it's a tribute to Andy Wood, but everybody described Andy Wood as some kind of like party fun guy, not this sorrowful, morose, miserable bastard that's become the scatter cliche.
I met him briefly once when we were recording the Buzz Factory, maybe the Sub Pop thing. He came into the Reciprocal studio, just, you know, hey, how you doing? And I saw them once at the Paramount. So I never saw him in a small venue. But the thing was, when I saw him at the Paramount, they were opening for somebody, and you know, his whole stage shtick it didn't come off like it would have, like at the Central, I don't think, because it was like he was trying to be David Lee Roth type of thing. And I know it was kind of a parody of that, which would have come off that way, probably like seeing him at the Central. But unfortunately, you know, so if they had got big, maybe it wouldn't be quite the same, you know. People like, I don't know if a wider audience would have understood that, because even at a place that's, you know, a 3,000 seat theater, it didn't come off like it probably did, you know, at a small club.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was a whole big part of it, was his whole stage shtick of, you know, being Landry or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think, well, even with Nirvana, you could see nobody knew how to understand sarcasm.
Yeah. That's true. I like sarcasm. So.
I do too. I speak it fluently.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always sarcastic about stuff. You have to be careful on Facebook, someone will be sarcastic.
So it was a combination of overhype and all the record company clamoring to find the next Nirvana.
Yeah.
Punch diluted it.
And we, you know, because when we finished touring in '93 for Sweet Oblivion and we're going to the next record, we, you know, immediately was like, we better take advantage of this, you know, but we hadn't been writing any songs. And so the fall of '93 was like spent trying to write, you know, something instead of like used to be, songs would come along. And this was like, write songs now. And Lanigan was just starting to get into dope and stuff at the time. So instead of, see, it was really weird with him, like his drug cycles, like the band started when he was like, you know, in high school, he was like massive party or drug and thing. And then he had some shit happen when he was in his early 20s, and he stopped cold turkey, at least for, as far as I know, drinking and doing drugs for about 5 years until about 1990. And then he started smoking pot when we went to Europe the first or second time in 1990, because like a lot of people were giving us weed, you know, be like in Amsterdam or Holland, people give us pot, and there was a lot of pot around, more than the US. So he was like stoned a lot, and especially like recording it, like Terry Date was like one of those producers, it's like real big stoner. But then when we did the tour for Uncle Anesthesia, so we had the big wreck in Wyoming. We had 2 vehicles. Most of us, that was when Dan Peters was this band, me and Dan Peters and Rod Doak, our sound guy. Smaller band, and Lanigan was in the equipment van with 2 guys, 2 roadie guys, and it flipped on black ice in Wyoming, and nobody got hurt bad, but it freaked him out so much that he started drinking again. We had like, we had to regroup, had to get more vehicles, had to cancel about a week or 2 of shows. Then we ended up in Chicago, and suddenly it's like, Lanigan's drinking again. It's like, what? Huh? So that tour, it had to be cut short because everyone was so fucked up. And so, you know, we had Dan Peters with it. He was used to like everyone getting drunk and drinking already. So he joined in. It's like, hey, yeah, this is fun. And I never hardly drank anything, you know. So it was just kind of like watching band, and Dan Mark is like, okay, that's nice. But a bright side, because, you know, if somebody's misfortune can have a bright side, is when we finally did figure we were going to do another record in the middle of like summer '91. Lanigan was drinking a lot, and his whole demeanor was, he'd be fucked up some, but he also wanted to socialize. He would be like wanting to get together and do stuff. He wanted to get together with us and write songs. He'd come over to my house and sit there, and I'd play stuff. Be like, hey, that's cool. That's how we wrote Shadow of the Season, you know, actually together, you know, in the same room. And like I was playing the beginning, he's like, oh, and he comes over and records that beginning part. Then of course he left, and I wrote the rest. And I was like, hey, how's this? Yeah, but yeah, I was like that, like Dollar Bill. We like sat down, and Van was playing guitar and he was singing it, and you know, all this. And then at the same time, we'd actually go and record or go practice the songs. After Barrett got in the band, Barrett had a loft where we could practice, and we go, and Mark would stay there. Usually he wouldn't even come to the rehearsal. He'd just be like, you guys rehearse without me. And he was like that later, but that year he come to rehearsal, and that was one of the huge differences of that record than any of the other records. But when we came to the next record, after that, like, you know, in 93 when grunge was still pretty huge, he didn't want to have anything to do with it because he was so dope, which like was totally, you know, he was like,
Yeah, he wouldn't let you quit.
yeah. Oh yeah. And he wouldn't let us quit either. So yeah, so we did the same team with John Aniello and Don Fleming that did Sweet Oblivion, but we flew him out to Seattle instead of going out to New York. And we just didn't have the songs. You know, we had Dying Days was one of the songs we had that made it to the next record. That's probably the one, but it just wasn't, you know, musically it wasn't there. I mean, we could have released it, we could have mixed it and just, you know, and maybe it would have been our biggest record, you know, because of the it's possible, you know. There was a couple like that one song in retrospect is really good. That was on, it's called The Right Combination. That was one of the songs from out here, and it's on YouTube. It's like somebody like was bootlegging some shit like it's been on for quite a while. I put it back on later when I was putting on some stuff that I found. But yeah, so you know, it came down to like musically, Mark didn't like it, and you know, if he doesn't like it, we have to do what he says. So if it would have been up to us, we probably would have finished it and put it out. But so we spent most of the rest of 1994 and the good part of 95. I had just got married and was going to move to New York with my wife, at least, you know, when I could, and then fly back to Seattle. But I had to stay out, and I got an apartment house combination in Seattle and stayed there. My wife came out in the summers, but she had to work, so she couldn't. And songs. So we started off in the summer, probably was the early summer '94, and we did get Landon to come over, and Van and me were together, and we were working on that song, gospel. It became Gospel Plow.
Which you didn't know was a traditional folk song.
No, I didn't. Van and me were in one room with the 4-track, and Lanning was lying on the bed, stone, you know, nodding off.
Yeah.
And we were playing that kind of beginning part, and he starts singing that. We're like, wow, this is really cool. And then he left us to write the rest of the song, of course, like he usually do. But yeah, it wasn't until like way later after the band was broken up that I realized that was traditional. So I don't know, crazy. But what that ended up turning into was me sitting in that apartment every day for like a year and a half, writing songs. And you know, every day, all in the beginning of the day, it's like, what are you doing? Which meant, are you writing songs? And I'm like, oh yeah, right. And if I wasn't, he'd like, what's going on? You have to do this. And my whole day would consist of, and Van was living north of Seattle and Stanwood, where he actually lives now. So he came down sometimes and we'd work together, but mostly it was just me. And I'd work on the songs all day, try to get inspired somehow. And, you know, I just had to write whatever it was. I just had to come up with something. So there were a lot of really crappy songs. I mean, a lot of songs that had, oh, this part's really cool, but the rest of it just sucks. Late that night, you know, late at night, I had a really cheapo Chrysler LeBaron that actually ran for a year when I was in Seattle, which was good because I needed to get over to Lanning's house on Capitol Hill and give him the tape, and he would just stick his hand out the door and take it. And then if I didn't hear, probably 9 times out of 10, I wouldn't hear from him the next day, except for like, what are you doing? He wouldn't say anything about the song I wrote, unless he liked it. Then he'd be like, oh, this is really good, blah, 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 blah. And he might talk me up for a minute, and then I'd see him again that night with the next tape and either hear from him or not hear from him. That went on till like the fall of '93. And in that middle of that was when we tried to break Van and we tried to leave the band because we were just sick of it, you know, because we were trying to make a living. And like suddenly it's like, well, we're not making any money at all. We were like borrowing money from our managers who were like, in the meantime, that was another thing we did. It was a huge mistake, was got hooked up with these guys, Q Prime, which Peter mentioned, Carl Bernstein.
Oh boy.
And they managed a lot of bands like AC/DC, Def Leppard, stuff like that. They were like big time managers. And we got hooked up with them through our A&R guy, Bob Pfeiffer from Epic. He was a real cool guy, but you know, he was like, you gotta use these guys, or you make it huge or whatever. And they wanted to get into the grunge thing, so they were like, okay. Then Pfeiffer talked meant to doing us, but on the other hand, they had Lanigan, who was like totally, you know, fucked up all the time on dope. Didn't help. But they about a year or two later, they ended up getting the Smashing Pumpkins for a while too. So,
Okay.
no, it was like, it was too big time. And for some reason, I've never had the experience before with a manager. I mean, we didn't have a manager until Susan Silver in 1990, but none of them ever like, what are the songs? We have to make sure these songs are okay, blah, blah, blah. But these guys were like, we had to send fucking tapes of our songs to them. And they, of course, wanted them with Lanigan singing, but Lanigan would never sing them. So finally, after about a year, all this, we were, the one bright spot in the middle of the whole thing, in early 95, is we got to go to Australia and do the Big Day Out tour, which was really fun. Except for all the
Is that when the Howling Branches feud started?
What?
Is that when the Howling Branches feud started?
That was a little bit later. Like that was like, that was a US tour. I'll get to that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, the Australia tour was a lot of fun because we were like stuck in like rainy Seattle. So in the middle of summer in Australia, that's a fun tour with a lot of cool bands, like the Cult and that band UMI. I really like them all. They're an Australian band. Who else was on that? Ministry. But the only drop, well, Hole had been on like the New Zealand shows, but Courtney Love was around. And so was Evan Dando, and they would hang out with Lanigan in the dressing room. And at least 2 or 3 times we'd come back to the dressing room, it would just be covered with fucking blood and used needles and shit. And so that was kind of, that part was
that
gross.
sounds like any time Courtney Love's in the room, that's her son. He was there.
I never had too much dealings with her, but I never was real, didn't ever think, oh, she's a really nice person. I used to have to be in the same room when Lanigan talking to her on the phone. So I don't know. It's kind of crazy. So anyway, that's like, you know, finally we got Georgia Coolidge to produce that record, the Dust album, and got to LA. And then things went a lot different. Like things kind of like looked up, and even though Lanigan was still kind of, you know, he was having on and off, you know, he managed to sing on the record. He didn't really do any of his like editing that he normally does, like changing very many lyrics, you know. He had a few things here and there. Yeah,
so most of Dust was you?
Yeah, Dust is all me and Van. Like some of the songs, like Gospel Plow is me and Van. Witness is all, that's Van's song.
Yeah.
And Van helped me on a few songs like Hail of Ashes, but it's mostly that's why it's more psychedelic because it's my yeah. I mean, the only real significant thing that I know that Lanigan probably did that I thought helped the record artistically was came up with the name Make My Mind, which was called, I think I had something like, was it You're On My Mind or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but he one day our crowd was like, well, how about we call it Make My Mind? They're like, that's cool, it's different, and, you know, 3-word title, which was usually good. We thought
actually, Krash, you should check that one out.
Yeah, we wanted that to be the first single actually, but Epic wasn't into it for some reason.
Well, Lanigan's voice isn't as, you know, maybe it's less grungy, but it's not near as powerful as it was.
No, it's because he was on dope, I think. A lot
of it sounds more of a moody Jim Morrison, and I know he'd hate that comparison.
See, the difference was on Sweet Oblivion, his singing was done after he'd been like drunk on a 3 or 4 week, I don't know how long, bender, and he was all hungover and he had to sing. It was like, well, it's now or never. You either got to sing. And he also had to have a bunch more lyrics because we've been writing the songs together. About half the songs didn't have all the lyrics. A lot of them didn't even have titles. You know, we were like, had like half, you know, like working titles for a lot of the songs. And they kicked us out of the studio. Like he came in like 3 or 4 days. And then we're like, here's the tape of what he did. And we're just like, holy fuck, he came through. Like, wait. The thing he ever did was on Sweet Oblivion. And, you know, that was nice. It worked out that way. So
yeah, Dust definitely has a different feel. It's definitely
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, there was probably a whole nother album worth of really good material that we didn't use. I mean, I guess a lot of that was on my like demo albums I got under the Weeping Willow Tree. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff from all sorts of time periods, but some of the songs are like there's songs called like Tolling Bells, the one I called Violins and Violence. What else is on there? A couple other. There's several others that are I thought was like, man, why aren't these on that? You know, we should have done these songs. You know, it was just trying to get anything that Lanigan would like. Because and we go through times where he's like, those were songs that are probably on the list of what we're gonna do. And then something else would come along, you know. And then like we were just getting ready to go in the studio and like that song Dime Western. That's another title he came up with. It's probably some kind of drug dope thing or something. I think it's like Dime Western.
Wow.
Something like that. I didn't have a title for it. It was like, you know.
Yeah.
So because that's not even in the song, I don't think, whatever that lyric is. Dime.
Do you have anything else you want to ask Thunders about pretty much anything?
Anything.
How are we doing on time?
Anything solo? Anything? Because I mean,
working on new stuff. I mean, I'm always working on new songs and stuff. I don't know if I get real energetic, I'll just like, I think when I've really been thinking in the direction of putting out like either just single songs for a while or singles, because nowadays, like I mean, artistically, it's nice to have a record, but it doesn't really,
yeah.
You know, it's more like it was in the 60s with like singles, you know, everyone. And when people release albums, they usually put out, you know, a song like months before, maybe another one a couple months before. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking. It'll probably also make me do a little less lazy seeming, like not doing stuff every like several years. It'd be nicer to do stuff every several months.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've got some new songs that I've working on, and maybe one of these days all of a sudden I'll just release.
Maybe Sub Pop will sign you and put you on their singles club.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I tried a little bit to like right after the band broke up in 2000 or so. Try to get some to get some you know, people interested in signing me or whatever like that. But I don't know. I didn't really pursue it very much. So, and finally I realized 10, 11 years ago that I could just do it myself. And the only reason I wanted to do it was just, you know, because I like to write songs and I like to, you know, I like to make music that I like. You know, I saw something, who was it that said, I think it was Bob Dylan. He said, like, if you like the music that you're doing, then you're lost. I think that was a Bob Dylan. But I'm the opposite. I mean, to me, it seems like if I didn't like what I was doing, I would be lost, because that's my motivation for doing it. I mean, I don't sit around listening to my own music all the time, although, you know, I do when I'm mixing it, working on it. I got to, but when I finish, like, man, I would listen to this record if I didn't make it, you know, I would, you know. Yeah. So that's my main motivation, you know, artistically, just being an artist, like making stuff. That's a sort of human, for some people, like a human function is like being artistic and creating things. And the other thing is to make albums that I like, you know. And if I start making ones that I don't like, I'm like, maybe I should more. Yeah, and it's older too. I mean, some artists just to make stuff that's like, God, why are they even doing it anymore? You know, I hope I don't get to that point, you know, stop doing it if I do. You know, pretentious lyrics are just like, I can't quite listen to. Or maybe stuff that's way too much like something.
Yeah, or like a forced feeling.
Yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, some people, you know, kind of transcend that. Like back in the 90s with Neil Young, you know, he was in his 50s and he was like doing stuff that was just as good as the stuff he did in the 70s. So I think a lot of people would probably say that. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and then what was I saw the other day? A new Donovan video. I don't know. I think that's not real new. It's a few years old or something. At least the song. Yeah. And it's like part of it's like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Then the other part of it's like the it was called I Am the Shaman. And they put all this, I think the reason it was weird is because it was David Lynch like produced it or something. He was trying to make
really?
Donovan's best stuff was all light and cool. I don't know. Donovan was like one of my hugest influences, especially for my newer solo stuff. Because he was so fucking cool for a while, but then he became really uncool. I don't know how that happened. Like, if you look at him, like in like he made like Sunshine Superman, the album was made in 1966, and if you listen to that record and think this was made in 1966 when all the like Revolver was made in 1966, but it's one of the most psychedelic records ever. I mean, the whole thing is just like, I guess he was probably doing acid or something at the time, but it's just, drenched in like psychedelia. And he also has this cool jazz sort of thing, but he was, he reinvented himself from this Bob Dylan clone with a Scottish accent to this like coolest.
I had that record, so I know what you're talking about. It's a very true record.
Right. So up to, that record and Mellow Yellow, he had a lot of record company problems where they didn't put out stuff in the same, like English albums were different than the US albums. Like
Beatles had that issue.
But then of course, like he just kind of, I think it was part of the problem with that, like Where Your Love Like Heaven was like too much. And like half of it was all kids songs. So it was kind of like, it was a double record with a massively psychedelic looking cover. And I don't know, I don't like that record as much. Then on the later 60s records, he had stuff like Atlantis, which was a great song, and Barabba Jaggle. That's another really cool song. That's got like Jeff Beck on it. It's like Jeff Beck's band backing him up. But then like, it's the old hippie thing in the early 70s. It's funny, like those old hippies were like, they were really old, like they were 30 years old and they were old. Like, yeah. But,
like Cheech and Chong, right?
Huh? Yeah.
Like Cheech and Chong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. If you ever seen Up in Smoke, that one part of Up in Smoke, the battle, the rock fight at the Roxy, man, that captures some really amazing stuff. That's not really. It's a band called the Berlin Brats. For years I tried to figure out who it was, and some other bands too from like 70. It was like pre-hardcore LA. Yeah,
like the first wave of
punk,
that punk.
Who they didn't quite know what they were doing, but like there's 3 or 4 bands on there. It's like when it's finally Cheech and Chong plays, but there's this like like stuff that was going on that you never hardly hear anything about it. But the band, the Berlin Brats, they were called something else later, but they were really cool, and they're one of the main things that's really cool on there. Up in Smoke.
Yeah, I knew that there were a lot of bands there that were up and coming. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, they never went anywhere, but they were like.
So, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but in closing, I like to ask, what do you love about music? What keeps you going?
Let's see. Well, that's a good question. What do I love about music? I mean, I think the reason I love it is because I consider rock music art. I mean, some people think it's just crap, like throwaway crap, but to me, it's like an art form, and it's advanced from its infancy back in the 50s and 60s, and it's had ups and downs. And I've been really excited to find out that there's still stuff I really like that's fairly new, in the last 10 years or so, and even currently. So that keeps me going, that like, I can actually sit down on Spotify and find new, not new as in from 1995, new as in like from 20 that I like. And I guess it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's just such a big part of my life since I was like, a little kid, wanted to somehow like be in a band or something. I'd like to listen to rock music. I mean, we started out listening to like 50s stuff. It was like my mom, she was graduated from high school in 1957. She had a huge box of like 50s singles, really cool stuff like Little Richard and Chuck Berry and Elvis.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Really little, like in the 60s when I was probably like 7 or 8 years old, 6 years old, would listen to that stuff. And I remember one of the first rock albums. And I think the beat is weird because the way I got in the Beatles at first was in the mid 60s, there was a Beatles Saturday morning cartoon. And I'm sure I one of the Beatles songs for the first time on that cartoon without even thinking about it. I don't remember it too much, but I know I must have. But the first album I remember in 1970-ish or so, there was my mom and dad was going to party at their house, and they were probably 30-ish. And somebody brought Creedence Clearwater Revival, like Cosmos Factory. And we listened to it and we're like, whoa, we really love this. That was like one of the first albums I remember really loving. But then like from that time on, we collected a lot of, and that was like all the old hippies were selling all the records at yard sales. So we'd go to yard sales like 11, 12, 13, 14 years old and buy all these albums. And one of the albums we bought that ended up being a huge influence was the MC5 Kick Out the Jams. Got that.
Oh yeah.
So we'd listen to that and like Van and me would like lip sync to it, pretend like before we even like knew how to play guitar and stuff. So yeah,
that's how I started out.
Yeah, so it just like became such a big part. And then like later it was like wanting to be in a band, have a real band, and then actually haven't done it. I like pretty much lived my dream like in the 80s and 90s of doing what I wanted to. I could, it would have been nice to keep going on the one hand, but the other hand, it's like I've had a good life of not being in a band. So, and it's nice to still be able to do the music and make that be important and not any of the business crap about the, and just doing everything myself too.
Yeah.
Because ultimately the business of music is what really hurts it. It just, it can be it either indie labels or major labels. It comes down that something's mismanaged. You get too many bands on your label. I mean, that's what happened to SST. I don't know their full story, but at least part of their problem seemed to be that they just, were bent on world domination. They had so many fucking amazing bands on their label, and then they didn't have, they, started not having money, and or with major label bands, it just like, that's just like built into the whole industry of,
yeah,
this
so
huge type.
definitely definitely once you run out of money, your hands are pretty much tied.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing in the world being a musician is having it become a job. And in the 90s, mid 90s, that's what happened to me and Van and Mark and everybody else. And, I don't know about Lanigan nowadays, but that's the main thing he's got going. Like he must, like, if he doesn't do shows, he doesn't have any money probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
Him doing some shows that, God, this week, last couple of weeks, man, every band in the world is like, we're gonna play this show, that show, festivals, which is really cool. Although I'm not, I don't know. I've thought about doing live stuff, but I just,
That's one thing me and Krash were gonna tell you is, we'd really like to see you bring your solo stuff to life.
Yeah, it would be cool on the one hand, but I'd have to have somebody help me do it. I don't like hang out with.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'd be willing. I'm not anything special, but you tell me what to do and show me how to play it, I can do it.
Yeah.
I have that much faith in you, man.
Maybe someday. I don't know. Old, so that'd be something.
Well, at least you and Van should be doing something. You guys write.
I've been trying to record and stuff with him, but it's just he's kind of. We have like we actually have 2 songs done, but he won't. I can't get him to send me the files back so I can finish them up and get them. It's like we were gonna do a single on his label on the Strange Earth records, and Jack and Dino actually played drums on it. I had a couple songs that there were older songs that I was gonna do for my last record that I ended up not using because I had some other songs come along. Like, and I had sent it to Jack because he was like, hey, I'll play drums on some stuff. I was gonna see if he could play drums on a bunch of stuff, but it was like, it's too hard. It's like, too hard to play, but he did manage to play a couple songs. And the bands would play bass and stuff. And actually Sally Berry did some backup vocals and stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
But I'm trying to get him to send me the tapes back so I could, because he's got the tape, or not the tapes, but the files, and he's got them like I don't know what, he put all this stuff on there, and if Jack and Dina's gonna get it and mix it, I'm gonna have to like at least make sense of them for 20 tracks. Like, what's this? Half of it's this bass, and then there's backup vocals on the other half, or something like that. So I don't know. So yeah, that may come out. We actually are using an old band name if it does come out. We had a band with me and Patrick, my brother Patrick, and then like, and we never did anything. We recorded some stuff and never put out, called Dr. Severin is Insane. It's like, I think, from Star Trek episode.
Sounds very psychedelic too.
Yeah, if I can get him to get his shit together.
I was almost wondering if you're about to say you were reviving the Purple Outside name.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that a few times. In fact, when I came with the micro.gnome thing, I was thinking about that, but I don't know.
It was an album title, and now it's become official title, so to speak.
Really confusing, because what I did at first was, I'll just make it like it's going to be the band name, but it's just me, make it look like that was when, because I hadn't done anything for quite a while. I was just starting to put stuff on the internet about like 2010 or so. And so I thought, that's a cool band name. I'll name it that. And then I put it out and didn't do a lot. I had on Reverb Nation. And then when what was I can't remember which thing I was doing. I was doing the Ether Trippers record, which was the next record I did after that, like a few years later. And I was like, well, I'm going to call it Micro.gnome again, or my name. And I was like, well, I'll probably get a little more attention just for my name. And then after that, I was like, well, I'm going to put the record back out. So then I was like, okay, it's a record title, and I'll use it as a nickname, sort of too. So it worked out. That's what
it fits.
Yeah, it does, because it's like a psychedelic sort of thing. Like, I like Yard Gnomes too. I don't have that many, but I have a few.
I have to say, that's one of my favorite album covers of the modern era too.
Yeah, the gnome one.
Yeah, such a simple idea, but it works.
Yeah, I painted that little guy, but he's still he got kind of broken. He's still out there.
Oh, wow. Bummer.
Well, that's pretty. We got a pretty long interview here, but
okay,
we thank you, Gary, for coming on the show and just bringing a blast of the past. Even just explain your new stuff and Screaming Trees era. We appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Yeah, it was fun.
For new fans, where can people find you and your merch?
Yeah, I'm on Bandcamp. You can get like vinyl and some cassettes and a few CDs and digital. You can stream everything free. I realized that was probably a pretty cool thing to do, because like the main reason I'm doing is so people can hear it, right? So all free stream. So if you want to hear anything on Bandcamp, it's like unlimited streaming free. It says Gary Lee Connor at bandcamp.com. And then also I put everything, it's on like Apple Music and Spotify and stuff like that. It costs money. I have to like pay to do that, basically, because you don't make anything unless you're a lot of stuff. So I put that as a service to people, basically. Maybe break even if I'm lucky. But
yeah. So that, I guess, pretty much wraps up the show. And we like we said earlier, we thank Gary for coming on the show. Wealth of information, wealth of knowledge. And if you guys
nice real account history.
Yeah, definitely. And if you guys like what we're doing here with all the people we're bringing, artists that we're bringing on the show, click the subscribe button, leave us a comment for Gary. Sure, he'll look around at it one day here. And we just appreciate everyone being here in the community. And until next time, this is Krash, and that's Thunders. We'll see you guys later.
All right.
Cool.